the Flight 191 and takeoff. It was Friday, May 25, 1979, a warm spring afternoon in Chicago. The city pulsed with life as families prepared for the long Memorial Day weekend, a time traditionally spent honoring fallen soldiers, traveling, and enjoying the unofficial start of summer. At Chicago O'Hare International Airport, one of the busiest airports in the world, the mood was one of anticipation and routine. In the bustling concourses, travelers hurried past neon signs for food courts and newsstands selling newspapers that headlined politics, sports, and summer sales. Children tugged at their parents' hands, clutching toys or snacks for the flight. Business travelers tapped briefcases and checked wristwatches, while airline employees in crisp uniforms directed people toward boarding gates. The smell of jet fuel lingered faintly in the air outside, mixing with the roar of aircraft engines that never seemed to stop. Taxiing jets crawled like giant beasts across the tarmac, lining up for departure. Airport staff moved with practiced efficiency. Ground crews directed planes with glowing batons. Luggage handlers stacked bags into cargo holds, and flight crews completed final checks. To everyone in the terminal, it was a normal day at O'Hare, where dozens of flights departed every hour. No one could have known that within minutes, one departure would become a national tragedy, forever etched in aviation history. Assigned to American Airlines Flight 191 was a McDonnell Douglas DC-1010, tail number N110AA. At first glance, the DC-10 looked sleek and powerful, its wide fuselage and 3 engines promising speed and strength. The jet had entered service earlier in the decade and was advertised as part of a new generation of air travel, larger, faster, and more comfortable. With its twin aisles, the DC-10 could carry hundreds of passengers across long distances, making it popular for both domestic and international flights. Passengers often remarked on its size. The cabin felt spacious compared to earlier jets, and its quiet, smooth ride was considered luxurious for the time. Yet, behind its glossy reputation, the DC-10 carried a cloud of controversy. Only a few years earlier, in 1974, a Turkish Airlines DC-10 had crashed near Paris due to a cargo door failure, killing 346 people. The tragedy had raised concerns about the aircraft's design and safety. McDonnell Douglas made modifications, but the shadow of that accident lingered. Still, for most passengers boarding Flight 191, these concerns felt distant. The DC-10 was a modern aircraft operated by a major U.S. airline, and to them, it symbolized reliability and progress. It was simply the plane that would carry them from Chicago to Los Angeles on a routine westbound journey. The men in the cockpit were not novices. They were seasoned veterans of the skies. At the controls sat Captain Walter Lux, age 53, a highly respected pilot with over 22,000 flight hours. Lux had joined American Airlines in 1956 and had decades of experience flying everything from early propeller planes to modern jets. Known for his calm demeanor and steady leadership, Lux was the kind of captain passengers trusted without even knowing his name. Beside him was First Officer James Dillard, 49, a skilled aviator with more than 9,000 hours of flying experience. Dillard had joined the airline in 1956 as well, and like Lux, he was well versed in the DC-10. His role was crucial. He would handle many of the flying duties under Lux's supervision, ensuring the workload was balanced in the cockpit. At the flight engineer's station sat Alfred Udovich, 56, a veteran of 16,000 hours of flight time. The flight engineer's job was to monitor the aircraft's complex systems, fuel, hydraulics, pressurization, and more. In an era before advanced computers automated these tasks, Udovich's vigilance and expertise were critical to the safe operation of the plane. Together, the 3 men represented a combined total of nearly 50,000 flight hours, a wealth of experience few passengers could have imagined. Supporting them was a team of 10 flight attendants, trained to ensure safety and comfort in the cabin. Their presence provided passengers with reassurance that they were in good hands. On board were 258 passengers, a microcosm of America in 1979. Business travelers carried paperwork and wore tailored suits, their minds already focused on meetings awaiting them in Los Angeles. Families filled rows with children eager for vacation adventures, Disneyland, beaches, or visits to relatives. There were elderly travelers making cross-country trips to see loved ones, young adults chasing opportunities on the West Coast, and couples planning romantic getaways. Each seat told a story. Among them were employees of several companies, including executives, engineers, and salespeople, many traveling together. There were newlyweds starting a new life chapter, and parents with infants hoping for a smooth flight. Some passengers read magazines or newspapers, some chatted with neighbors, and others quietly gazed out the windows at the bustling airport. For every single person aboard, Flight 191 was simply a means of getting from one place to another, a bridge between Chicago and Los Angeles. Not one of them could have known that they were about to become part of aviation's darkest chapter in the United States. At approximately 2:50 p.m., the aircraft was cleared to push back from the gate. Ground crews directed it into position as the engines spooled up with a deep, thunderous hum. The DC-10 slowly taxied toward runway 32R, joining the procession of departing jets. Inside, passengers buckled seatbelts, adjusted air vents, and listened as flight attendants gave final safety briefings. The mood in the cabin was calm, routine. The weather outside was favorable. Skies were mostly clear, with good visibility and a light breeze. Ideal conditions for flying. In the control tower, air traffic controllers cleared Flight 191 for departure. At 3:02 p.m., Captain Lux advanced the throttles and the jet surged forward. The acceleration pressed passengers back into their seats as the runway rushed past. Numbers climbed on the cockpit instruments. 100 knots, 140 knots, 150 knots. First Officer Dillard called out V1, the decision speed beyond which takeoff could no longer be aborted. Moments later, Lux pulled back gently on the yoke, and the nose lifted off the ground. The DC-10 climbed smoothly into the sky, engines roaring as it left the runway behind. For the first 31 seconds, everything seemed normal. Passengers may have looked down at the shrinking airport below, pointing out landmarks or simply enjoying the sensation of flight. In the cockpit, the crew followed standard checklists, their attention focused on gauges and instruments. To anyone watching from the ground, it was just another departure from O'Hare. Powerful, graceful, and uneventful. But hidden beneath the left wing, a disaster was already set in motion. In less than a minute, Flight 191's ordinary climb would transform into chaos, and the deadliest aviation accident in U.S. history would begin to unfold. At 3:02 p.m., American Airlines Flight 191 had just lifted off from Chicago's O'Hare International Airport. The DC-10 climbed steadily, its three engines pushing the jet skyward, but only moments into its ascent. Just about 300 feet above the ground, something catastrophic happened. The number 1 engine, mounted beneath the left wing, suddenly tore loose from the aircraft. Witnesses on the ground described the surreal moment as the 18,000-pound engine seemed to rip free, flip upward over the top of the wing, and crash back down onto the runway below. To those watching, it looked as if the aircraft were literally falling apart in midair. Some thought the plane had been struck by a massive explosion. Others believed a wing had caught fire. The truth was no less shocking. One of the aircraft's 3 engines had simply detached, an event almost unheard of in commercial aviation. The separation wasn't neat or clean. It was violent and destructive. As the engine tore away, it ripped with it hydraulic lines, electrical wiring, and part of the pylon structure that secured it to the wing. In an instant, the aircraft lost not just thrust, but critical control systems. The engine's departure triggered a chain reaction of failures. On the DC-10, leading-edge slats, movable panels along the wing's front edge, were crucial during takeoff. They extended to increase lift at low speeds, helping the heavy jet climb safely. On the right wing, the slats remained extended, functioning normally. But on the left wing, the hydraulic systems controlling the slats had been destroyed by the engine's separation. The slats retracted without the crew's knowledge, leaving the wing aerodynamically crippled. This imbalance set the aircraft on a deadly course. The right wing produced strong lift. The left wing began to stall. Normally, the cockpit warning systems would have alerted the crew to the problem, but the same torn wiring that disabled the slats also disabled the warning lights. To Captain Lux, First Officer Dillard, and Flight Engineer Udovich, it looked like a straightforward engine failure. Serious, but survivable. They did not know that the aircraft's aerodynamics were fatally compromised. On the ground, hundreds of people had an unobstructed view of the unfolding disaster. Airport staff paused in disbelief as they saw the massive engine tumble free. Motorists driving along nearby highways slowed to watch as the plane climbed unnaturally. Some witnesses reported seeing smoke trailing from the left wing. Others described sparks and debris falling from the sky. One witness, a mechanic working near the runway, later recalled, "It was like the engine just popped off. It wasn't gradual. One moment it was there, the next it was flying over the wing." Another witness, standing near a terminal window, said the aircraft looked wounded, like a bird missing part of its wing. Some assumed the pilots would circle back and make an emergency landing. Few could imagine that the plane had only seconds left in the air. Inside the cockpit, the crew immediately recognized the loss of thrust. Losing one engine was not in itself a death sentence. The DC-10 was designed to fly on two. Captain Lux and First Officer Dillard would have followed procedures drilled into them countless times in simulators and training flights. Their priority was to stabilize the aircraft, assess the problem, and return to O'Hare for an emergency landing. But unknown to them, their instruments were lying. The slat warning system, meant to signal the retraction on the left wing, was dead. To Lux and Dillard, the jet still looked balanced. They may have believed they were simply climbing out with reduced power. Their checklists and training had not prepared them for the catastrophic failure they now faced. The combination of engine detachment, structural damage, hydraulic loss, and false instrument readings. As the DC-10 climbed, the asymmetry between the wings grew worse. The right wing, with its slats extended, kept generating powerful lift. The left wing, with its slats retracted, began to lose lift rapidly. Aerodynamically, the aircraft was entering a stall, a condition where the wing can no longer produce enough lift to sustain flight. In the cockpit, the crew may have felt the aircraft pulling unnaturally to the left. They likely adjusted controls, trying to correct the imbalance, not realizing the stall was irreversible. On the ground, people saw the plane's nose dip slightly, then the left wing drop lower and lower. The once stable climb was turning into a deadly spiral. From the moment the engine detached to the final seconds before impact, less than half a minute passed. It was a silent countdown that no one in the cockpit, the cabin, or on the ground could stop. Passengers inside may have felt the aircraft lurch, perhaps heard unsettling noises from the left side. Some may have looked out the windows to see smoke or debris trailing, but most would have had no idea that the plane was already doomed. In just moments, the imbalance would become uncontrollable. The DC-10 was no longer climbing safely. It was rolling, stalling, and descending toward disaster. Inside the cockpit, the three men, Captain Walter Lux, First Officer James Dillard, and Flight Engineer Alfred Udovich, were working under unimaginable pressure. The sudden loss of the left engine had been startling, but as trained professionals, their instincts would have taken over. Standard operating procedure dictated that an engine out after takeoff required maintaining climb cleaning up the aircraft configuration and preparing for a return to the airport. But Flight 191 was no ordinary engine failure. The engine separation had caused catastrophic collateral damage. The left wing's leading edge slats had retracted, though the crew had no warning. To the pilots, it appeared they were simply flying on reduced power, with 2 engines remaining. What they could not see, what no instrument in the cockpit revealed, was that the aircraft's aerodynamics were fatally compromised. The controls would have felt strange. The jet pulled to the left, resisting their attempts to keep it level. Captain Lux and First Officer Dillard would have applied opposite control inputs, rudder, aileron, adjustments to the throttles, trying desperately to counteract the imbalance. Their voices, had they been recorded, would likely have been calm but urgent, calling out checklists, reacting instinctively. But the DC-10 was slipping beyond the limits of control. As the jet climbed, the right wing, with its slats extended, generated ample lift. The left wing, with its slats retracted, was starved of lift and began to stall. A stall occurs when airflow over the wing becomes too disrupted to generate lift, and in this case, the stall was asymmetric. One wing kept flying. The other was failing. The imbalance grew more pronounced with every second. The left wing dropped lower and lower, pulling the jet into a leftward roll. The pilots fought back, but the forces were overwhelming. The DC-10 rolled past 30 degrees of bank, then 60, then beyond 100 degrees. Witnesses described it as almost flipping sideways, the belly of the plane visible from the ground as it tilted far beyond any safe angle. For those on the ground, the scene was horrifying. Motorists on the nearby highways slammed on their brakes, pointing in disbelief as the massive jet appeared to twist unnaturally in the sky. Airport employees on break rushed to fences and windows, some frozen in place, others shouting warnings no one could hear. One witness later recalled, "The plane just rolled over, like it was trying to turn but couldn't stop. It was so fast, so unnatural for something that big." Another described the eerie silence before impact. It wasn't like in the movies with a long, drawn-out fall. It was sudden. 1 second it was climbing, the next it was coming down. Inside the cabin, passengers may have felt the aircraft banking hard, their bodies pressed against seat belts as gravity shifted. Some may have cried out, others sat in stunned silence. It all happened too quickly for anyone to process. At 3:04 p.m., just 31 seconds after takeoff, American Airlines Flight 191 struck the ground. The jet, banked heavily to the left, smashed into an open field near a trailer park and a hangar, only about a mile from the end of the runway. The impact was devastating. The aircraft hit with enormous force, breaking apart instantly. A massive fireball erupted as thousands of gallons of jet fuel ignited, sending flames and black smoke towering into the sky. The explosion was so intense it rattled windows miles away. For those nearby, the ground shook as though an earthquake had struck. The wreckage disintegrated across the field. Pieces of the fuselage, wings and luggage scattered over a wide area. The forward section of the plane buried itself into the ground, leaving a crater. The rear sections, torn apart, burned in towering flames. There were no survivors among the 273 souls on board. Death had been instantaneous. The crash site was a scene of chaos and horror. Workers in the nearby trailer park fled as fire consumed the area. Several trailers were destroyed, and vehicles burst into flames. 2 ground workers were injured by debris and heat, though miraculously no one on the ground was killed outright. Firefighters and emergency responders raced to the scene, their sirens piercing through the heavy smoke. What they found was beyond hope. The fire was so intense that crews could not approach the wreckage immediately. Instead, they fought from a distance, spraying jets of water and foam onto the inferno. The flames roared back, fueled by jet fuel and debris. Rescuers knew instantly there would be no survivors. There was nothing left of the passenger cabin that could have sustained life. For families waiting inside O'Hare, the news began to spread in hushed whispers and panicked cries. Airline staff tried to gather relatives of the victims into private rooms, but the magnitude of the disaster was overwhelming. Hundreds of lives had been lost in seconds. Within hours, news outlets across the country carried the story. Images of the burning wreckage flashed on television screens, anchors struggling to find words to describe the scale of the disaster. The death toll, 273 people, made it the deadliest aviation accident in U.S. history. Shock and grief spread across Chicago, Los Angeles, and beyond. For many, the sheer suddenness was the most haunting aspect. One moment, families were saying goodbye at the gate. The next, the aircraft was gone, consumed in fire and smoke. It was a reminder of the fragility of life and of how quickly a routine journey could become a national tragedy. In the hours after Flight 191's fiery crash, investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, were dispatched to Chicago. Their mission was daunting: to determine what had brought down a brand new wide-body jet within seconds of takeoff. The wreckage field was massive, with pieces of the DC-10 scattered across hundreds of yards. Flames still smoldered as investigators in heavy coats and helmets picked their way through the debris, searching for clues. Every crash investigation begins with the black boxes, the cockpit voice recorder, CVR, and the flight data recorder, FDR. Miraculously, both were recovered quickly from the charred remains, yet when analyzed, they yielded little comfort. The CVR contained almost no useful audio. The engine separation had destroyed critical wiring, leaving a near-blank recording of cockpit chatter. The FDR, however, painted a clearer picture. The left wing had suddenly lost lift, causing the plane to roll and stall. The evidence pointed not to pilot error, but to catastrophic mechanical failure. Almost immediately, investigators noticed something extraordinary. The number one engine, instead of being found at the crash site, was located far behind the wreckage, on the runway itself. This meant the engine had detached in midair, a nearly unprecedented event in commercial aviation. Witness accounts corroborated this. Dozens of people had seen the engine flip over the wing before falling away. The NTSB team, now with global attention focused on them, zeroed in on a critical question. Why did the engine separate? Was it a design flaw in the DC-10, a hidden defect in the pylon assembly, or something in the way the aircraft had been maintained? The DC-10's engines were mounted beneath the wings by pylons, structures that connected the heavy engines to the wing spar. When investigators examined the left pylon assembly, they found evidence of severe metal fatigue and cracking. The damage was not sudden. It had developed over time. The NTSB soon learned that American Airlines, like some other carriers, had adopted a controversial maintenance shortcut. Instead of removing the engine and pylon separately, as McDonnell Douglas's manuals required, mechanics had developed a procedure that used a forklift to remove both together. This time-saving method shaved hours off maintenance schedules, but it placed extreme, uneven stress on the pylon fittings. The cracks in the left pylon of Flight 191 had originated during one of these maintenance checks. By the time the DC-10 took off on May 25, 1979, the damage was so severe that the pylon could no longer support the engine's weight. The violent detachment during takeoff was inevitable, but the investigation revealed an even darker twist. When the engine tore away, it ripped out wiring that controlled the left wing slat position and warning systems. The result was catastrophic. The slats retracted on the left wing, destroying lift. The slat disagreement warning light, meant to alert the crew, was disabled. The stick shaker, a device to warn of an impending stall, also failed. The pilots had been flying blind. To Captain Lux and his crew, the situation looked like a routine engine out. They never knew that the left wing was fatally compromised. In the words of one investigator, they were fighting a battle they didn't even know existed. As these findings emerged, the public reacted with anger and fear. How could a brand new wide-body jet simply lose its engine? Was the DC-10 fundamentally unsafe? Airlines, passengers, and governments demanded answers. The media ran headlines about the cursed DC-10, pointing to a string of earlier incidents, including the 1974 Turkish Airlines Flight 981 crash in Paris, which had killed 346 people. Pressure mounted on the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, to act. Within days, the entire U.S. DC-10 fleet was grounded. International regulators followed suit. It was the first time in history that a specific wide-body aircraft type had been banned from flying worldwide. Behind the scenes, blame shifted back and forth. McDonnell Douglas, the manufacturer of the DC-10, insisted the design was sound. If airlines had followed the correct maintenance procedures, the pylon would not have failed. American Airlines, meanwhile, argued that the forklift method had been informally approved and that other airlines were using it too. The truth, as the NTSB concluded, was that the crash was a perfect storm of design vulnerability and maintenance malpractice. The DC-10's pylon design was not robust enough to tolerate mishandling, and the airline's shortcuts had exploited that weakness until it failed catastrophically. In December 1979, the NTSB released its final report. The probable cause was officially declared as the separation of the left engine and pylon assembly due to improper maintenance procedures. The subsequent damage to hydraulic and electrical systems, which caused the uncommanded retraction of the slats on the left wing, the loss of stall warning systems, which left the crew unaware of the imminent aerodynamic stall. It was a damning verdict, not just for American Airlines, but for the entire aviation industry. Safety oversight had failed at multiple levels, from the airline's maintenance departments, to the FAA's regulatory enforcement, to McDonnell Douglas's design tolerances. The grounding of the DC-10 lasted for weeks, costing airlines millions. When the aircraft was finally cleared to fly again, stricter maintenance procedures were mandated worldwide. The FAA issued new inspection protocols. McDonnell Douglas reinforced pylon designs, and airlines abandoned the forklift method permanently. More broadly, the crash of Flight 191 reshaped how aviation safety was managed. It highlighted the dangers of cutting corners in maintenance, the importance of redundant warning systems, and the need for closer cooperation between manufacturers, regulators, and airlines. For the families of the victims, the report offered cold comfort. No technical explanation could fill the void left by the sudden loss of 273 lives. But for the aviation world, the investigation of Flight 191 became a case study in systemic failure, a reminder that safety depends not just on machines, but on the people, policies, and decisions behind them. In the weeks following the crash of Flight 191, grief hung heavy over Chicago, Los Angeles, and dozens of other cities touched by the tragedy. Families gathered in churches, synagogues, and community halls, searching for answers and support. Funerals filled newspaper obituary pages, and photos of smiling passengers, business people, children, grandparents, newlyweds, reminded the nation that behind every statistic were lives cut short. For the city of Chicago, the tragedy was deeply personal. O'Hare was one of the busiest airports in the world, and the disaster had unfolded in broad daylight in front of thousands of witnesses. For days, the skyline was haunted by the sight of smoke rising from the crash site. The horror wasn't just in the numbers, it was in the immediacy. The shock of seeing a modern jet collapse in front of so many eyes. For decades, the crash site itself remained an unmarked field near a trailer park in Des Plaines, Illinois. Families of victims pushed for a proper memorial, a place to grieve and reflect. After years of advocacy, a dedicated memorial park was built, opening in 2011, on the 32nd anniversary of the crash. The memorial, located just north of the impact site, features polished granite walls inscribed with the names of all 273 victims. Surrounding the walls are trees and flowers, designed to symbolize renewal and peace. Visitors often leave flowers, photographs, and handwritten notes. For relatives, the site is sacred ground, the only tangible place to honor those lost in the fireball of Flight 191. Every year, especially on anniversaries, small gatherings are held. Families light candles, share stories, and remember not the tragedy, but the lives that filled the seats of that doomed DC-10. The legacy of Flight 191 extends far beyond its memorial. The tragedy forced airlines, manufacturers, and regulators to reckon with the consequences of shortcuts and oversight failures. Several critical reforms grew directly out of the investigation. Maintenance overhaul. Airlines abandoned unsafe forklift methods and adhered strictly to manufacturer-approved maintenance procedures. Mechanics were retrained, and oversight became stricter. Redundant safety systems. Aircraft warning systems were redesigned with greater redundancy, ensuring that critical alerts, like slat disagreement or stall warnings, would still function even if electrical lines were severed. Regulatory authority. The FAA strengthened its enforcement role, requiring closer monitoring of airline maintenance practices and mandating more rigorous inspection protocols. DC-10 revisions. McDonnell Douglas reinforced the DC-10's pylon design and implemented global inspections of the fleet. Though the DC-10's reputation suffered, the jet continued flying for decades, proving that lessons learned had made it safer. In aviation schools today, Flight 191 is still taught as a case study in human factors, maintenance risk, and systemic safety management. It is a grim but vital teaching tool, a reminder that disasters are almost never caused by a single failure, but by a chain of decisions, oversights, and missed warnings. The crash also left an indelible mark on the American psyche. In 1979, commercial aviation was still viewed with a sense of wonder, a symbol of modern progress. The idea that a state-of-the-art wide-body jet could simply lose an engine and fall from the sky shook public confidence. For months afterward, travelers hesitated to book tickets on DC-10s. Newspapers ran stories about nervous passengers refusing to board the aircraft type, even after it was cleared to fly again. The term, the DC-10 disaster, became shorthand for catastrophic design failure, even though the official cause was improper maintenance. The incident cemented a broader truth in the public mind. Air travel, while safe, could never be taken for granted. Beyond technical reports and aviation reforms, Flight 191 is ultimately remembered through the lives it claimed. The victims came from all walks of life: teachers, scientists, salespeople, entire families traveling for vacations or reunions. Some stories became emblematic of the tragedy, like children traveling alone to visit relatives, or couples embarking on long-planned adventures. Each life represented a thread suddenly cut, leaving ripples of grief across countless communities. For survivors' families, the grief never fully faded. Many carried anger at the system failures that had doomed their loved ones, but also a determination that no one else should suffer the same fate. Their advocacy for stricter aviation oversight became part of the legacy of Flight 191, the ultimate legacy of American Airlines. Flight 191 lies in its role as a turning point in aviation safety. It underscored that safety is not only a matter of design, but also of discipline, culture, and accountability. A shortcut in a maintenance hangar, a regulatory blind spot, or an overlooked inspection can be just as deadly as a structural flaw. In that sense, the disaster was not meaningless. Every improvement in aircraft redundancy, every stricter rule about maintenance oversight, and every lesson taught in flight schools carries the echo of Flight 191. The passengers and crew who perished that day became silent guardians of the skies. Through their loss, future travelers would fly more safely. Today, More than 4 decades after the tragedy, Flight 191 remains the deadliest aviation accident on U.S. soil. Its story is not just about a plane that fell from the sky. It is about the fragility of trust, the cost of shortcuts, and the enduring resilience of those left behind. The granite walls of the Memorial in Des Plaines are inscribed with names, but they also stand as a stone reminder to an industry and a world. Safety must never be taken for granted.